An essay by Ben Franklin to the Pennsylvania Gazette, 1732, September. On censure, or backbiting. There is scarce any one thing so generally spoke against, and at the same time so universally praised, as censure or backbiting. All divines have condemned it, all religions have forbid it, all writers of morality have endeavored to discountenance it, and all men hate it at all times, except only when they have occasion to make use of it. For my part, after having frankly declared it as my opinion that the general condemnation it meets with proceeds only from a consciousness in most people that they have highly incurred and deserved it, I shall in a very fearless, impudent manner take upon me to oppose the universal vogue of mankind in all ages, and say as much in behalf of the vindication of this decried virtue, as the usual vacancy in your paper will admit. I have called it a virtue, and shall take the same method to prove it such, as we commonly use to demonstrate any other action or habit to be a virtue. That is, by showing its usefulness, and the great good it does to society. What can be said to the contrary has already been said by everybody, and indeed it is so little to the purpose that anybody may easily say it. But the path I mean to tread has hitherto been trod by nobody. If therefore I should meet with the difficulties usual in tracing new roads, and be in some places a little at loss, the candour of the reader will the more readily excuse me. The first advantage I shall mention arising from the free practice of censure or backbiting is that it is frequently the means of preventing powerful, politic, ill-designing men from growing too popular for the safety of a state. Such men are always setting their best actions to view, in order to obtain confidence and trust and establish a party. They endeavor to shine with false or borrowed merit, and carefully conceal their real demerit. That they fear to be evil spoken of is evident from their striving to cover every ill with a specious pretense. But all examining censure, with her 100 eyes and 1,000 tongues, soon discovers, and as speedily divulges in all quarters, every the least crime or foible that is a part of their true character. This clips the wings of their ambition, weakens their cause and party, and reduces them to the necessity of dropping their pernicious designs, springing from a violent thirst of honor and power. Or, if that thirst is unquenchable, they are obliged to enter into a course of true virtue, without which real grandeur is not to be obtained. Again, the common practice of censure is a mighty restraint upon the actions of every private man. It greatly assists our otherwise weak resolutions of living virtuously. What will the world say of me if I act thus? Is often a reflection strong enough to enable us to resist the most powerful temptation to vice or folly. This preserves the integrity of the wavering, the honesty of the covetous, the sanctity of some of the religious, and the chastity of all virgins. And, indeed, when people once become regardless of censure, they are arrived to a pinch of impudence, little inferior to the contempt of all laws, human and divine. The common practice of censure is also exceedingly serviceable in helping a man to the knowledge of himself, a piece of knowledge highly necessary for all, but acquired by very few, because very few sufficiently regard and value the censure passed by others on their actions. There is hardly such a thing as a friend sincere or rash enough to acquaint us freely with our faults, nor will any but an enemy tell us of what we have done amiss, to our faces, and enemies meet with little credit in such cases, for we believe they speak from malice and ill will. Thus we might always live in the blindest ignorance of our own folly, and, while everybody reproached us in their hearts, might think our conduct irreproachable. But thanks be to Providence, that has given every man a natural inclination to backbite his neighbor, we now hear of many things said of us that we shall never hear said to us. For out of goodwill to us, or ill will to those that have spoken ill of us, everyone is willing enough to tell us how we are censured by others, and we have the advantage of mending our manners accordingly. Another vast benefit arising from the common practice of backbiting is that it helps exceedingly to a thorough knowledge of mankind, a science the most useful of all sciences. Could we come to know no man of whom we had not a particular experience, our sphere of knowledge of this sort would certainly be narrow and confined, and yet at the same time must probably have cost us very dear. For the crafty tricking villain would have a vast advantage over the honest, undesigning part of men, when he might cheat and abuse almost everyone he dealt with, if none would take the liberty to characterize him among their acquaintance behind his back. Without saying any more on its behalf, I am able to challenge all the orators or writers in the world to show, with solid reason, that the few trifling inconveniences attending it bear any proportion to these vast benefits, and I will venture to assert to their noses that nothing would be more absurd or pernicious than a law against backbiting, if such a law could possibly take effect, since it would undoubtedly be the greatest encouragement to vice that ever vice met with, and do more towards increasing it than would the abolishing of all other laws whatsoever. I might likewise have mentioned the usefulness of censure in society, as it is a certain and an equal punishment for such follies and vices as the common laws either do not sufficiently punish, or have provided no punishment for. I might have observed that were it not for this, we should find the number of some sorts of criminals have increased to a degree sufficient not only to infest, but even to overthrow all good and civil conversation. But it is endless to enumerate every particular advantage arising from this glorious virtue. A virtue which whoever exerts must have the largest share of public spirit and self-denial, the highest benevolence and regard to the good of others, since in this he entirely sacrifices his own interest, making not only the persons he accuses, but all that hear him his enemies. For all that deserve censure, which are by far the greatest number, hate the censurious. That dangerous weapon wit frightens a million when a few you hit. Wit but occur as you ride through a town, and straight his fellow curs the quarrel own. Each knave or fool that's conscious of a crime, though he scapes now, looks for it another time. A virtue decried by all that fear it, but a strong presumption of the innocence of them that practice it. For they cannot be encouraged to offend, from the least prospect of favour or impunity. Their faults or failings will certainly meet with no quarter from others. And whoever practices the contrary, always endeavouring to excuse and palliate the crimes of others, may rationally be suspected to have some secret darling vice, which he hopes will be excused him in return. A virtue, which however ill people may load it with the opprobacious names of calumny, scandal, and detraction, and I know not what, will still remain a virtue, a bright, shining, solid virtue of more real use to mankind than all the other virtues put together, and indeed is the mother of the protectress of them all, as well as the enemy, the destructress of all kinds of vice. A virtue innately, necessarily, and essentially so. But dear reader, large folio volumes closely written would scarce be sufficient to contain all the praises due to it. I shall offer you at present only one more convincing argument in its behalf, that you would not have had the satisfaction of seeing this discourse so agreeably short as I shall make it, were it not for the just fear I have of incurring your censure, should I continue to be troublesome by exceeding it to a greater length.